Thank you, Dominic, and I'm honored to be here with so many honored guests this evening and have an opportunity to talk about the importance of China and United States relationship and the team that has changed the world and will continue to change the world. 200 years ago, China made up about 28 to 29% of the world's economy. And for 2,000 years, it was the largest economy in the world. 200 years ago, the United States made up less than 2% of the world's economy. And for most of the last 200 years, the United States was the great success story of the world. When you ask a young person, whether they be in China or the United States, what are the assets? What is important? What do you identify with as valuable assets? Most young people will start talking about houses, cars, factories, investments, etc. And the Federal Reserve in the United States, when it tells you what the household assets are every quarter, is focused on those areas. But that is the very small part of the real asset of any country. The real asset of a country is the productivity and the ability of the people. And many years ago, when I was visiting Lee Kuan Yew, we were talking about Singapore, a country that has been built on one concept: educate your citizens and attract the best and brightest people in the world and create an environment that they want to live in Singapore. And as we talked about China, and we talked about the fact that the ability and productivity of people will determine the future of any country. And as I was visiting more than 50 schools in China, almost 20 years ago, Lee Kuan Yew reminded me, never forget that in China, the most prestigious thing you could be for thousands of years was an imperial scholar. And as I saw the change in the schools of China, I could see the change in China. You always see the future of a country in its classrooms, both the challenges and the enormous opportunity. And so the real asset, 75 to as much as 90% of the asset of a country, is the productivity of its people, often referred to as human capital. The next largest asset is social capital. And what is social capital? It's public schools, it's religious institutions, it's parks, it's people working together. I would say to you, one of the best examples in this country, if you study history in the United States, was building barns as people moved across the country and an entire community came together, not for pay, but to build your barn, to build your farm, and the next week you might build your neighbor. Social capital, rule of law, property rights have been the cornerstone of building this country and will be for China in the future. Human capital, we increase human capital three ways. One, education, a love of learning. Two, healthcare, to extend both the length and the quality of your life. And three, on a micro level, a country level, a state level, a city level, immigration. This country was built on immigration. Today in California, for example, 15% of every company started in Silicon Valley. The CEO was born either in China or Taiwan. 30% of every technology and engineering company in this state, the CEO was born in either China or Taiwan. Today, more than 10% of all the patents issued in this country are issued for people that were born either in China or Taiwan. Dominic talked about this very important report of opinions. But I would say to you, maybe even more important in that report is to understand the first and the second derivative. Where is change going? Where are we going? The United States has been an amazing country. Maybe the only country in the history of the world in modern times that is willing to change its face peacefully. So when you look at the United States, or you go to elementary schools and you look at those textbooks today, don't be misled about the future of the United States. The future of the United States is both a Latin American and Asian story. Hispanics and Asians will be in the majority of people in the United States at some time in this country. The textbooks will be rewritten to focus much more on the history of Asia and the history of Latin America. In this state alone, in the last decade, the Asian population grew at a compound rate of over 20%, and the Latin American population grew at a compound rate of over 20%. And of European ancestry in this country, it basically was flat, but in California it dropped by 4%. It's the growth rate that determines everything. And as Albert Einstein told us, compounding is the most powerful force in the world, not E equals mc squared. And it's this growth that is changing America. So when you think about America and think about relationships, we need to understand where America is going, not necessarily where America came from. In 1960, 75% of everyone in the United States who was not born here was born in Europe, and 10% were born in Canada, 85%. Today, 85% of every person in the United States that was not born here was born either in Asia or Latin America. America is changing. I remember when I first came to one of the group meetings here that I was invited to by your chairman. I closed my eyes at that meeting because I didn't want to see, I wanted to hear. I didn't hear accents. I heard one person talking about how his college football team was doing against another. I could have been anywhere in America. When I opened my eyes, I saw primarily an Asian ancestry, but I saw America. The differences between America and China might appear to be great in the political realm, but we have so much in common. And as this country's ethnic change occurs peacefully in this country, we will even have more in common. Education. As Lee Kuan Yew pointed out to me a few decades ago, the United States, we sometimes forget, was built on education. Between 1870 and 1960, every decade, the United States added one more year of formal schooling. By 1960, the United States was by far the most educated country in the world, 2 years more than any other country. And it was the backbone. It was primarily educated by women from the top 10 to 20% of graduating classes in universities. In the past 50 years, the United States has not added at all to that level. Other countries have caught and passed the United States. When we read in the paper about the housing crisis, this belief that the size of your house is more important than the education of your children or the health of your family. Misguided policies by the United States over the past 20, 30, and 40 years have altered the utility curve of middle-class America. And middle-class America today spends 51% of its income on housing and transportation. moving farther away from where they work so they could spend more money on cars and oil, spending less time with their children, by defining who they are by the size of their house. And the average size of a middle-class family home in the United States grew by 60%, more than 200% higher than the size of a middle-class family home in Asia. A few weeks ago, I was visiting one of the leaders of China, one of the 2 or 3 most important people in investing the funds of the country. He told me he only had 1 visitor to his home in the last 10 years. If they want to visit with someone, they go to a restaurant. But I convinced him if he would let me visit his home with my wife and my sister, that when I left, his 2 sons would be mathematical wizards. I would introduce them to Mike's Math Club, and before I left, they could multiply 4-digit numbers in their head faster than any calculator. So he invited us to his home. As we approached his home in China, he lives in a 4-story apartment building. He was coming home on his bike. He does not have a car. He rides his bike to work. He was wearing a mask because of the environment and the air in Beijing. As we walked up the 3 floors to his apartment, 2-story apartment, modest, I could think about how am I going to create 2 mathematical geniuses before I leave in a couple hours. We were the 2nd visitor in a decade to his home. His home was of little and no importance. His children were of extreme importance, and his country was of paramount importance to him. He was not bogged down by the trappings of his car or his house. And in China today, a middle-class family spends 50% more on the tutoring of their 1 child than they do on the house. In America today, we spend 17 times more on our house than on the supplemental education of our children. And so that is one of the challenges of America, and one of the things that immigrants have always brought to this country, a focus on education and knowledge as freedom in the future. And one of the things we hope is that China, as it reasserts through its elementary, middle schools, high schools, and university, its role in the world and someday becomes the largest economy, will convince, once again, Americans and our utility curve that the education and health of their family is far more important than their house. The hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars lost from these foolish investment in homes is minor compared to the damage that it's done to the utility curve of middle-class America. And so education is the key. It always has and will always be. In immigration in our country, because of the issues of 9/11 and the difficulties, and I want to applaud the mayor and his work in making it easier for people, China and other countries, to come to America, there's been a dramatic change in the universities of the world. 20 years ago, if you were in China and you came to go to university here in the United States, and you went back to China, your average pay of those individuals was 4 times that student that remained in China. Today, it's often only 25%. The gap has narrowed. The United States is still the leader in the world. And because of immigration and difficulties of getting into the United States, in a recent study which we prepared at the Milken Institute, of the 20 leading bioscience universities in the world, 2 are now in Australia, the University of Melbourne, the University of Sydney. Both of those universities have been fueled by students that have come from China, many of whom could not get into the United States to study. 2 are now in Canada, University of British Columbia and the University of Toronto. Both of them fueled. Toronto today, and you know the facts I'm sure better than I do, I believe probably has the largest Chinese population in North America. And as we all know, Vancouver is either a Hong Kong or a Shanghai suburb. I'm not sure today. But both of those universities have been the beneficiary. Singapore today has one of the 20 leading universities in the world, fueled often by students who've come from China. And the surprise to many of you is that the UK, England, has 25% of the 20 leading bioscience universities in the world. And if you step back and find what's occurred there, a university such as Imperial College, one of the great science universities of the world, had 108 students from China in 2001. In 2011, they had 1,800 students from China. 1,800, and 50% of the increase in all the students in a science university that has 12 Nobel Prize winners have come from China. The future has been altered by the difficulties and the solutions of our time. Agriculture, water, energy, environment, health, etc. All of those will be answered in this century by issues of bioscience. In those cities, and we have the good fortune tonight to have 2 presidents with us here tonight, from UCLA and USC, 2 of the great universities of the world. Those cities that have these universities and those countries will lead the world in this century. In terms of health, in China a few weeks ago, I had a chance to visit with thousands of young scientists who are studying, and we are providing them data in this cooperation. What's interesting in China is we start to see the increase in certain cancers such as breast, prostate, ovarian, etc. Hormone-driven cancers on the East Coast, as diet has changed and physique has changed. In closing, in 1961, there was a president. In his inaugural, he challenged Americans. And he asked us, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. We are a generation, most of us born after World War II, whose parents told us we can be anything we want, and one person can change the world. In 1957, Sputnik went up. The Soviet Union, and I was in a panel a month ago with the president of Russia today, Mr. Putin, in my opinion, believed this was the finest day, the finest hour of the Soviet Union, that they had succeeded in science, the first one to put a satellite in space. In many ways, that wasn't their finest hour. That was the day they woke up the United States. DARPA was formed, NASA was formed, and that was really the day that the Soviet system came down, as the United States started focusing and recommitting to education. We have many challenges, as does China. Housing. The call to action occurred in '85, but we did not listen. Energy. The call to action occurred in '74, and we took no action. Education. The call to action in the United States occurred in '83, and many of us have worked hard, but we really haven't responded. Entitlements and promises and health care and so on. But in the end, there's only one answer, and that answer is a commitment to education of the children of succeeding generations. You can build beautiful buildings, you can create great inventions, you can create enormous wealth for you and your family, but there is no promise unless you've educated the citizens and created an environment where each person feels that they have an opportunity and freedom is based on education, and capital will flow to those with ability. Without that promise to your citizens, ultimately, a nation declines. Two nations interlocked. In 1820, they made up 31 to 32% of the world's economy. In 2012, they make up 31 to 32% of the world's economy. They have so much in common. That partnership will determine, in many ways, the future of our planet. I thank you for what you do and for the opportunity to visit with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milken, for such an insightful presentation.